Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Yasser, and this is the Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. How many of you are joining us for the first time? All right, excellent. Welcome. Glad to have you. The format of the meeting is basically it's going to go for approximately 90 minutes or so. And then we're going to have some closing remarks, some raffle prizes, just a couple overhead items before we get started. Restrooms, if needed, are straight down the hallway on the right-hand side. Also, please put your cell phones on vibrate. And last but not least, participation is encouraged, so feel free to ask any questions, jump in with any comments. Tonight's presenter is Scott Stoll. He's going to be talking about Flutter, as you might have guessed. And so the presentation will last for approximately 90 minutes, and then afterwards we'll meet over at Simon's Tavern for some drinks, socializing, and networking. So I will let Scott introduce himself, and we'll start with the presentation. It's all yours, Scott.
Thank you, sir. I am Scott. I am not an alcoholic. And we are here today to talk about Flutter. Now, let's see something real fast. How many of you consider yourselves an expert on Flutter? Anyone? Okay, I don't have the expert on if there's an expert on Flutter in the room, I have to get rid of them if I can discuss the sound without you. All right, how many of you have played around with it? Heard of it, are curious? Got dragged by the neck here and I have no idea what I'm talking about. It's usually more hands than I normally get. But, all right. Flutter, the easiest way to put it is if you think about Android as a framework, but Android is not written in Java. I'm sorry, Android is not Java, it's written in Java. Android is not a language. It's an SDK. Same with iOS. iOS is not a language, it's written in Swift or Objective-C. Okay? Flutter is not a language, it's a framework, like iOS and Android. It's written in Dart.
Who? It's written in who?
Dart.
Dart?
Yep, we'll get into it. So, that's what we're doing here this evening. Now, I am a Flutter guy. I will be able to show you how to use this in Windows. That's part of tonight. We've been playing around with that and making great strides in it, making a lot of changes in it for the last week. As I had mentioned earlier, the original repo was in C++. Simon Lightfoot has since completely rewritten it into C#. So we're having a good old time with that. We're finding and fixing bugs all the time. The interesting things about Flutter in Windows is it is not supported by Google. It's not their intention. Okay, it never was. They won't do anything to slow it down, and if there's anything little they can do to help, sure, they'll pitch in and help. But their team is stretched thin as it is. Windows is not a officially supported platform. So they're just crossing their fingers, wishing the community good luck, and working overtime on what's in front of them. So that said, what is Flutter? Well, first of all, the slides work better if I get my cursor onto the right side. Okay, so what is Flutter? In a nutshell, Flutter's awesome. I need to know with but what Flutter really is a mobile-ish, and I say ish, cross-platform framework for writing programs that run on phones and tablets, and we're stretching that into Windows, Mac desktop, Linux desktop, and also a OS coming up called Fuchsia. As I said, it's not just Mac OS, I'm sorry, it's not just iOS and Android. Fuchsia's up and coming. Embed for Windows, we're having fun with that. The embeds for Mac and Linux are actually further along than Windows, quite a bit further along than we're easier to work with. It's like a game engine. Okay, since you all are pretty experienced, I'm going to be able to dive into this a little bit. What it does is it draws right to the canvas, which is basically it's drawing to an OpenGL texture. Okay. It's using the GPU directly, and Mark Seidel, the man who started this whole thing, basically said that the way Flutter came to be was he was on the Chrome team and they were working on the graphics engine for Chrome, which is called Skia. And long story short, there are a lot of things that are in Chrome, and I'm sure in Edge as well, that check for older code and older web pages and have to be backward compatible. And it slows the browser down horribly. It'll slow any browser down. Apparently there's some code that goes back to 2000 or before that for some Israeli banks that you have to be able to check with an if statement. And apparently that's buried so far in the browser, it's ridiculous and slows everything way down. So they gave themselves a week and said, what happens if we take the engine for our web browser and disconnect it from the web? All those limitations that we have to deal with for rendering web pages and the restrictions, throw them out. Now this thing would obviously crash like crazy if you threw it on the web, but they didn't do that. They just decided to see what they could render with it and what they could do with it, and the results were shocking. So they were able to convince the powers that be to invest a little more money into it, and they've been working on it ever since. When I say it's like a game engine, it's really like a game engine. It does not use the UI elements from Android or iOS. All those lists and everything, you touch, your buttons, your sliders, doesn't use any of them. It looks exactly like it uses Chrome because there is something called material design specifications, which a lot of you may have already heard of. It's how big should a button be? How should certain things handle? How close do you let certain things be to each other so that you don't, I think Twitter broke them when they moved everything down low. Now people are fat fingering all kinds of things at the bottom of the app. I know my fiance hates it. But there's the material design specs, and for iOS there's the human interface specifications. And what they did on the Flutter team was they implemented these when they made their own UI components. Now what do I mean by their own UI components? The games on your phone have their own UI components. Clash of Clans does not use your standard lists and your standard buttons off of your phone. Clash of Kings doesn't. All these games with whatever it is that they're dropping down, and you have to move them out of the way, or it fills up and you lose. All of these things have their own custom UIs. Flutter does too. You don't realize it because it looks exactly like the UIs that you're used to using. The reason for that is that they have implemented these specifications to the pixel. They've gone crazy and made it pixel perfect. They've also studied the physics of Android and iOS lists for the acceleration of the game, the deceleration, and all that happiness. They went over to the Android team and said, this is the formula we've got to make our list view handle like the recycler view. What do you think? And they looked at it and said, wow, that's an easier formula than we want to use. Literally. So the Android team, I don't think they changed theirs, but they were pretty impressed. You can also make your own custom UI, and there's one other little thing I want to say about the human interface specifications. When I first started with this, I asked one of the developer relations people at Flutter, said, how can Flutter make an app? And we're deploying to both iOS and Android at the same time from one piece of code, so we don't have to have two teams or any of this other stuff. But you're putting it out there, and it's so perfect that people don't realize it's not an Android app, or they don't realize that it's not a normal iOS app written in Swift or Objective-C. So yeah, how are we copying Apple's user interface design that perfectly and not getting the pants suit off of Google? And Wem said, I'm not allowed to answer legal questions. Serious? Yeah, not allowed to answer legal questions. time, what I learned was that Apple, at one point, they decided they wanted things to be compliant, so they gave the specifications for the UI components to developers. Genie's out of the bottle now. Flutter just implemented them. Public knowledge is out there. So, yeah, they can imitate everything on an iOS phone and to the point where you don't know the difference. And that's the whole point. Because when you write an app, you don't want your users to look at this thing for 60 seconds, say, I can't figure out how to use it, delete. Gone. You want them to pick it up and have it handle and feel the way that they expect it to feel. Okay? If they grab some game that they've never seen, yes, they expect to learn the UI. If they grab an app that is a news aggregator, no, the list should handle the way a list is supposed to handle. When they tap on a button, it's supposed to do what a button does. It's supposed to look like a button. Otherwise, they'll go find someone else's app that does. It's a game. Now, it uses Dart. That's Dart. Well, one language to rule them all. Dart started quite a while ago in 2009-ish. And the idea behind it was that it was going to be in Chrome and it was going to rival JavaScript. It was supposed to be the big JavaScript killer. So they pivoted and they ended up doing a number of different things that changed the language, made it a lot easier to work with, and they ended up using it inside of Google as their own in-house language for a lot of different things that they're doing. When they decided how to make Flutter, they examined a lot of different languages, looking at a lot of different characteristics. And some languages are better than Dart for some things. But when they actually looked at the whole, Dart was the best overall choice. Now, it's easy, really easy. You guys, you know, with 2 years experience at least, you can literally pick it up. I'm not kidding. It's got a normal C syntax. It uses semicolons on the end. Okay? You don't have to type public or private. You just state your return type and then your method name. Okay? Or if you want to make it private, you use an underscore in front of it. The compiler will treat it as private then. Okay? They really simplify the types. You use an int or a double. You don't have to use a long. You don't have to use a short. You don't have to use a gazillion other things. You have bools, strings, list, enum, maps, type, and reoccurring generics. And notice there's no chart. There's no array. Don't panic. That's what the fine print says. Don't panic about arrays. There's no long, there's no short, no float. So what happens here? The main reason, one of the biggest reasons that Flutter is using Dart is the garbage collector. Okay, now it has a young space scavenger and parallel mark sweep. Okay, because of this, the garbage collector is not nearly as expensive as the one's number frameworks, not even close. Especially when it comes to Java Virtual Machine and Android. Now, in Android, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they use a lot of inheritance, and when you write for Android, you make your UI with breadth. You don't drill down deep and start nesting things very, very deep because it gets expensive very quickly and you run into jank. If you're not familiar with the term jank, what that basically means is you go to do something on your phone and it just kind of freezes for a moment and then it jumps again. That's almost always because of the garbage collector. So what happens is we're allowed, or we can, freely construct and destroy objects at an insane rate. Not just thousands a second. According to Eric Seidel, they can do tens of thousands of small objects in a second. Okay, with that garbage collector. That opens up a lot of doors. Okay, for one, we can get away with using a list and get rid of arrays. They're just not expensive.
So, just so I'm understanding, Flutter is more on the client side, correct? And the Dart is the language.
Flutter's client side, Dart's the
On the
language.
client side?
Dart's the language. Flutter's client side. You can use Dart's server side, but that's a whole different subject that's out of my area. So, I do know a number of guys who use Dart for server side. If you really want to learn a lot about that, you can get a hold of a guy on Stack Overflow by the name of Gunther. He goes, his moniker on Stack Overflow is Zoechi. To give you an idea, last time I checked, he has 285,000 points on Stack Overflow. So most didn't think that was possible.
Are the same people behind Flutter that are behind Dart?
They all know each other really, really well. There is one man.
Google's.
Well, it's a mix. What it is that Flutter is open source. Okay, but Google has picked up the ball and is investing a ton of money into it. They're paying teams full time. And when I go like this about Flutter and Dart being the same, there are two separate teams, but there's one guy that's the boss of both of them. His name is Ken Sneed. Okay, so he is over both of those teams, but they are separate.
So I deploy a web app, and I want to deploy it to Android. These other ones too. So, and I then rewriting the front end, rewriting my HTML, CSS, JavaScript.
I mean, if you're going to deploy to a phone, you pretty much are going to need to you would probably end up using either Kotlin, maybe Java for Android, or you'd end up using Swift on iOS. The thing is, the main thing with Flutter is that you don't have to write separately for both of those. This is, we don't really deal with the web very much. We're dealing with the mobile devices. We're dealing with your phones, with your tablets. Also, the Internet of Things. Fuchsia is going to be the OS that drives things like the display in your refrigerator. Okay, all kinds of, everything that's very, very small. Because of what's going to be behind that and what makes that possible is the Zircon kernel. They're getting away from the Linux kernel when they go to Fuchsia. And the main reason that they're looking at that was twofold. One, the Zircon kernel is so much smaller, they can get away with it in smaller things, such as a refrigerator display. The other thing is that Google will be able to control it. A lot of times right now, the development of Android can be hung up while they're waiting for improvements to be made to the Linux kernel because it's completely out of their control. So, moving on. We have a tree-shaking compiler with Dart. So if you're not familiar with that, what this basically amounts to in Flutter is, as I've said, Flutter brings its entire UI, its own UI. So it would be a bad thing to load an entire second framework's UI onto your phone in an app on top of the one you already have in Android or iOS. So what happens is the compiler will look through this and figure out what you're using and what you're not using, and it's going to discard what you're not using. It just strips it all out, and this helps keep your APK size down. Your APK is basically your installation file. Now, the nice thing about this, if you're using ProGuard and things like that, you don't need to use it anymore if you've written your program entirely in Dart. If you have written some of your stuff with platform-specific code, which you can, if you're writing the code that's specific to Android or iOS, then you might have to use it the same way you use it for that code elsewhere. But you don't need it for Dart. Now, the other thing is that Flutter uses code generation, not reflection. taking the Android developer nano degree, and I ran into some reflection the other day, and I'm sort of, now we said platform specific. We'll get into that in a moment, but what that basically means is that, yes, if you want to use something that is specific to Android or specific to iOS, you can reach out into the other framework and use it. Okay. One of the nice things about Flutter is you do it once, not twice. Right now, every time you see an app that has an iOS and an Android version, they almost always have had to hire and pay two teams. Two teams to develop it, two teams to maintain it. It's expensive. And it's very time intensive. You cut that down to one code base, one team. That right there is a huge cost savings. And if you take both of your teams and they're trained now in Dart and Flutter, there's a question. Are you putting things out? Are you going to put things out twice as fast, or are you going to put out twice as much? We all know that if you put 10 developers on something instead of 5, you end up slowing it down. So, not speeding it up. You lose all that save time in meetings.
Just sorry. So the Flutter.io, the homepage says that use it with existing code. So it's not, you're not real. I guess I was misinterpreting. I thought you could use, eventually like Electron, you can tie any web app into Electron and then
yeah,
it becomes.
well, as I said, the web views, I mean, Flutter's not really pushing a lot of web.
What does it mean by any existing code?
The existing Java code or the existing Objective-C that you're using.
So you still have to write in the native framework. You can't use like a .NET with Flutter on the front end.
Not really on the front end, but Simon's been working on some stuff with the back end. We'll get to that. So as I said, you only write it once. You can release on Android or iOS or both. No separate teams. There's only one code base to maintain, which an awful lot of people who have had to juggle teams really enjoys. Here's a really nice thing. Okay, let's say you have an old iPhone. Okay, really old. Right? Old. Apple has dropped support for various UI elements and various things at various times. And people who had apps that depended on it were, put it in the word, screwed. Basically just screwed. One of the nice things with Flutter is you don't care about that because you're bringing your own. You're bringing your own back-end code, you're bringing your own front end. No change that Apple makes is going to kill you. So, again, you only bring what you need. You don't bring the whole framework. The tree shape is probably going to shake out whatever you don't need. That can be a huge thing for a lot of people who have actually been screwed in the past and had apps that were basically rendered useless or had to completely rewrite them. Now, you can put any UI on any phone. You can take this all the way back to Android 19. They're up to 28. And you can, but the problem with that right now is to put anything on the Play Store, it's going to have to be 26 or higher.
How will that be?
Hmm?
How will that be?
By November. They're doing that by November. It's you can find that in the Android docs. So that's going to be very interesting. And basically, it's anything that's already on the store will be okay. But you're not going to be able to submit anything new unless it's 26 or higher. iOS is supported all the way back to version 8, which is iPhone 6. Another thing that this really does that you may or may not have already thought of, okay, two of the places that Flutter is exploding are China and the Middle East, and also in Africa. Now think about it. There are a lot of places in the world, I just read this morning actually. One of the problems that a lot of people have in other countries is sometimes they have to make a choice between an iPhone and a car. And the point of it, of that statement, was it's one of the reasons that Android is so dominant in a lot of parts of the world. It's more expensive for an iPhone here, yes, but in other places it's insane. Another point is, in a lot of these places like Algeria, Nigeria, places in South Africa, okay, Lebanon, those are huge markets. But you're talking about people who cannot afford to upgrade a phone every 2 years. You're talking about people walking around with an iPhone 7 in their pocket, and they're still going to have it for 2 or 3 more years. You're talking about people walking around who are running Marshmallow. Okay. They're doing Pi right now, which is 28. And these people are walking around, and they can't afford to upgrade. But they buy the hell out of 99-cent apps if you're willing to write for them. So, and with Flutter, you can write for those phones. And the thing is that even if, and Android's almost always backward compatible, but even if Apple decided to break that backward compatibility, as I said, you can still keep writing for those phones, and your app won't break. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is with Flutter, you get access to markets that can't afford to upgrade, and we're talking hundreds of millions, if not well over 1 billion people who are basically left behind when everyone's waiting for the latest erase. So if Flutter adds the part of the SDK that the app uses, what about the app size? Okay, and people used to complain it was an extra 8 meg. Well, as I put here, it's not the whole truth. Okay, at first, the people who said that were ignoring the fact that you have to have an Android support library in addition to your put out your app, and that was 6 to 8 meg. So they were roughly equal. Okay, they're not complaining about that; they're only complaining about Flutter. And I did recently, I really should get rid of that. About 6 weeks ago, the Flutter team did some more changes, and now 8 meg is 4.5. So that's what the minimum addition is. So basically, if you do a simple app and you compile it, send it to the phone, the minimum app size is 4.5 meg is what's added for the framework. So no, it does not bloat the APK size and take up all of the users' storage space, no matter how much Reddit is crying. And believe me, they cry a lot. Now, I'll show you here shortly one of the, this is when it gets fun. Okay? They practically redefined rapid prototyping. Now, a lot of times guys doing the web, people doing the web, you'll sit there and you'll make a change and you're running it locally. So you hit Control F5 and you get to see your change. Well, that's really nice. But if you're developing for Android, you have to do a Gradle build every time. Okay, there's a, in fact, I should have included it. There is a meme somewhere with a skeleton sitting in front of the computer and it says, still waiting for Gradle to build. If you've ever heard of Android devs talking about they'll start a build and go get coffee, they're not kidding. A Gradle build will take you a good 5 to 7 minutes sometimes, and you have to do it every time you do a change. With Flutter, you don't do that anymore. Hot reload is what happens when you take the state of your app and you change it, and then it reloads everything according to the state. What that basically means is that if you've got the car class and you change, I don't know, the number of doors, you change the color, you hit hot reload, it reuses the same object, changes the state of it, and boom, you're there. This typically takes about 0.8 seconds. So you see your adjustments that fast. Now that can be really handy, especially if you've been sitting there with a client and they're saying, little left. Oh, okay, a little down. No, I was back up. That's in rate less than 1 second for every single one of those changes. Whereas with Android, you were stuck rebuilding the grade all the while. Now you don't lose a state, big change. So let's say your car class is red and you change the doors from 2 to 4. You redo it. It kept every part of state that you had that you didn't fiddle with, so it's still red. You did not lose your state. Now, as I said, you change the color, you move it, etc. Use hot reload. Hot restart, different animal. What hot restart will do is it will recompile the Dart code, but it will not rebuild the project. It will not rebuild the framework, it's only going to rebuild your app. You use this when you change the instruction. I yanked out the scrolling list and I put a bunch of buttons in there instead. Okay, that's hot restart. So if you added a text widget, if you change the layout, you deleted an entire section, an entire screen, you'll want to wipe out the entire state and start over from the beginning, because when you do hot restart, it will completely blank your state and put you back to nothing. Or if you tweak an animation, one of the things is when you're tweaking an animation, you have to do hot restart in order to see it start again, because the animation is the state of the app. It has a lot to do with it. You do hot reload, it keeps the state, so it doesn't put your animation back to the beginning, it keeps your animation where it was. These are the times that you use hot restart. Now, compared to hot reload, hot restart is a snail. Okay? It takes anywhere from 3.1 to 6.2 seconds. Still not enough time for you to run out and get coffee. So, one of the biggest complaints that people say while they're laughing is, I'm going to lose all my excuses. Go run out and grab something to eat or have. Now, it's simpler and easier, which means there's a lot less that can go wrong. I'm not sure what you guys do in your stuff, but if anybody's worked with Java and Android, you have to write your text view UI element in XML, in an XML file, and then you go over to your Java file, and you have to call that up and make a variable and assign to that variable something called find view by ID. Then you go and put in the ID of your XML element. Then you have to turn around and do your variable name for that dot set text, blah, 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 blah. It's a mess. In Flutter, text, string, done. That's it. Now, if you want to style it, yes, there's a text style. We'll go into that in a little bit. But if all you're going to do is put some text to the screen, text, that's it. So, this thing about inflator, in Android, if you're going to do a list or a menu, you do what's called inflating it. So it creates the list and then it has to go and get the data, and they're calling it inflating the list by putting everything in it. We don't deal with that. Don't deal with it at all. Here's a list. Here's my list tiles. Done. Fine. It's that easy. So this is where we get into a little bit of the what it does and doesn't use and why. Okay? It draws directly to the GPU texture. It does not use the OEM UI components unless you want them. You can go get them and use them if you want. But normally, I brought my own. Hold my beer. Go sit down. I don't need you. Goes right around. UI widgets and rendering are going directly to the canvas, directly to the GPU texture. Platform channels is things like camera, GPS, IMU, all of the other hardware items that are on the phone. Some of those you still have to deal with the platform for because they're controlling those at a very low level. That's another thing, too, that I don't normally say in a 101, but for you guys it's probably appropriate. Flutter is written in Dart all the way down to the render layer. But below that, it's written in C++. Okay. There is, I can't remember if I put it in this series as far as or not, but there is a question of whether or not there is a virtual machine. The way most people think of a VM is dealing with an interpreted language. Okay, like Java needs the JVM. So, an interpreted language, of course, takes in the code, compiles it on the spot with a just-in-time compiler. So, in that sense, in your release code, I'm going to be specific, in your release code, there is not an interpreted language style JVM in Flutter. It does not exist. There is, however, a JVM in the sense that there is a virtual machine that is in ARM binary, and it is interfacing with the hardware. Because you have to have that. Memory controllers, things like that. Okay, so in that, because we have run into situations where people get into arguments, and one person's thinking of VM in interpreted code, and the other one's thinking of VM as in memory controllers. It turns out they're both right. So there is that. But as I said, the point here is that it's going around all of the Android and iOS native framework and their UI components and rendering. Now, if you need to use something, then you need to do this for me. Okay? You go right out and grab a widget. So if you want to use a list view out of Android, I don't know why you would want to, but you could. And you can write Java code or Swift or Objective-C if you're feeling really masochistic. And call in whatever you want. Now, there is one specific time when we're doing this, and that is because there is a problem implementing maps. And it's a very specific thing that has to do with the texture of the maps and rendering it. So the only way really around it, or the easiest way around it, I should say, is to go into the Android framework and use the maps view. So it calls it exactly as if it was sitting in an Android app. It's just this little piece of Android app sitting in the middle of your Flutter app. So if you're going to do something like a Google Maps implementation, unfortunately right now that's the only way to do it. But that's where method channels, platform channels really come into their own, because you can get away with still doing that. So just because you're writing in Flutter doesn't mean you're limited to only what Flutter has. That's one of the cool parts. It's also one of the trickiest parts to make work, but that's why we have help channels. Now, all of the other cross-platform approaches, such as Xamarin, Cordova, PhoneGap, number of others, they use a couple of different approaches that either use a bridge, proxy, things like that slow it down. They use interpreters. Okay, and all of this, number one, it slows things down. Number two, what their approaches are is you write your code, and then it interprets it and tells the iOS framework or the Android framework what you want. Okay? Number one, that's slow. As I said, number two, you're still tied to the OEM components. You're still at the mercy of if they change, your app just changed. If you lose or you're screwed. Okay? Web views use JavaScript and bridges to services, which is a bit better. Native proxy SDK is their binary, which is good, but they still have to use a framework proxy SDK. And then reactive views, which is actually what inspired Flutter, they use both JavaScript and a bridge. handling. Now, I do have to say, React is a great system. We don't diss it at all. It inspired Flutter. But because of that, it's got an anchor tied around its neck. And it can't be what it could be. So in Flutter, here's where it gets fun. When you're working with Flutter, they say everything is a widget. Well, the text element is a widget. What you would call a div is a widget. Okay, list view is a widget. An animation controller, which is logic, is widget. Your logic elements a lot of times are widgets, plus your UI elements are widgets. Everything is a widget, except when it's not. I like. Okay? You will see a lot of presentations that say everything is a widget and they stop there. I ran into this like a brick wall. Okay? There are things that are not widgets. They are called elements and render objects. Number one, if you're working in Flutter, writing for mobile, writing for anything in Flutter, you are never going to deal with render objects. They are, we have we are at so much of a higher level than the render objects, you don't even have to worry about it. So, elements, however, are in between the two. You don't normally have to deal with these, and at a 101 level, I don't normally go into it. But in essence, what happens, and what you will read about Flutter if you get into it, is that a widget is an immutable declaration. Fancy word for a blueprint written in ink. It's immutable because you can't erase it, you can't change it. But it's a blueprint.
Do you have any code examples?
Yeah. So it's an immutable declaration. It's kind of like a class. You know, your class is not actually your object. Your class is a description of your object. Your instance is your object. So the element is basically an instance. And then that gets turned into your render object. Is there a VM? Actually, we already went over this, so sorry about that. You could say no, you could say yes, we've already touched on that. Now, when you see the strange way the code is laid out, which you will enjoy, it's not Dart's fault. Okay, that's Flutter. It's that same guy, Gunther, who's got 285,000 points on Stack Overflow. I was talking to him one day about having a headache about writing Android in Java for my degree program. And he said, what are you talking about? And I showed him, and there was this one variable that to declare it was like this long with 1,000 dots in there. And he looked at it and he said, well, don't blame Java for a crap-ass framework. What are you going to do? Well, Flutter is a very good framework, but if you're having trouble following it at first, it's because of the way Flutter is logically laid out, and it'll make a whole lot of sense. Here's an easy example. First of all, we got a color key up here to let you know. This is basically out of my ID. Your constructors have an underline, they're in pink. Your parameters are in blue. Types and static fields there. Numbers are black, strings are green. It's one of the things that makes it easier on me. So now what we have here is it's nested very neatly and very organized. We have a container, which is basically like a div. Okay? Its height is 100, the color is purple, it has a child inside of it. That child is a center. Anything that is inside of the center is going to be centered not just horizontally, but also vertically. Okay? Inside of that is text, which will be centered, and it's called Hold My Beer. That text has style. If you want to make the text a color, such as black, okay, change the font weight, change the font size, that's a text style. It gets applied there. And then you just close out your bounds. It's very, very simple. So other points, if you are dealing, how many of you, I mean, I think you guys all use Visual Studio, pretty much? Anybody use VS Code at all? Okay. And VS Code will behave almost exactly the same as IntelliJ, because the plugin's the same. Alt-Enter is your friend. Okay, I imagine it may be the same in other code, but when you have an error, just Alt-Enter, it'll fix it half the time by itself. You can add widgets, remove widgets, add padding, center something, do automatic importing, adding functions. That's all with that. Refactoring is an interesting thing that I'll show you. And among the other things you can do in refactoring is make custom widgets. So what you can do is make a ridiculously long file. Every time, everyone says you're never supposed to write it all in one file. Write it all in one file. Then go to a couple of your constructors in there, and you refactor and you say extract a widget, and it pops it out and makes a whole new class. Now you copy it to a new file. But when you originally write it, you can write it as one big block. It's not a problem. And it's just as easy as placing a cursor on the constructor. You don't have to highlight anything. And it can be anywhere in the tree with as many children as you want. And the tree is the nesting of all the widgets. So there are a lot of ways to get help. This is something that I'll put up at the end so you can see. The Gitter channel is the official support, but it's all one channel. We outgrew that very quickly. There's a Google group for Flutter Dev. There's the Reddit group. There is another Reddit group, but this is the one that's really active. Okay. The R Flutter Dev. There's a Flutter community on Medium. There are 4 of us that run that. There's a Flutter community page on Facebook. Okay, and that is not to be confused with the Flutter community group on Facebook, which is run by some other people on the other side of the world. Unfortunately, it's a public group and they're getting flooded with, help me write a list view. That doesn't belong in a community Facebook page. That belongs in Gitter. We have the Twitter. You follow Flutter, and if you follow Flutter.io, that is most of it right there. That is where you're going to get most of the information on the announcements, etc. If you look at who I follow, there's a list there. That's most of the people who are doing a lot of good. Not to say that you'll ever get anything decent out of me, but at least you'll know who else to follow. And there's 24-hour live help in a web meeting every Wednesday. And this starts at 0 UTC when it becomes Wednesday morning, and then until it becomes Thursday morning. And the reason we're doing it that way was we decided we needed live help to help people out with Flutter, and they needed to talk through things and be able to discuss it. Okay, fine. So we decided we were going to use the Zoom for this. And we said, well, okay, we'll do this after work. And the question became after work for who? The guy who runs generic typing is in Japan. 3 of our best authors on Medium are in India. Okay. One of the guys that originally started the entire Medium project is in Germany. 3 of the other experts are in Germany. One of the biggest guys that does most of the presentations is in Egypt. One of the best experts is in London. Okay. And the guy who's actively doing most of the Medium management is in Trinidad. Not to mention the fact that there's another guy organizing most of the South American effort in Buenos Aires. Do you have any idea how many time zones we cover? So we just decided to make it 24 hours. If you want to come in and get help before breakfast, cool. If you want to do it after work, whatever. If you want to swing in 10 at night, there's usually somebody there, at least on Wednesdays.
Just another question. So that code we saw, that CSS style code, was that Dart you were showing us?
That's Dart, and I'm So you're a
Okay,
whole lot more
then
than
we'd
that.
also talked about, that there's not arrays or used lists, right? There's
The use list.
Is that Dart as well?
Yeah.
So do you have an implementation? Because that portion seems to be server-side code, and what you showed was more on the client side. So there's a
No,
little
sir,
disconnect.
If you're gonna do a list of names, that's not server side.
But you were referencing an array, right?
No, you're referencing a list of strings. We'll show
But
you.
you're showing a UI, a CSS type view, and what I'm asking is there's a disconnect there, because, I mean, you don't
can run
usually
this
see, you
offline.
don't,
There's no server to it.
there's just a disconnect, because you're showing a UI side, right? But
Yeah.
then you're also talking about, you don't typically, in CSS, UI, you don't, GUI side, you usually don't use arrays or strings. That's
Right,
on the
now,
server
okay,
side.
I think where the disconnect is that this is not just the UI. This is not just front end. This is also your business logic. Okay, it's all here. And if you're going to try and tie to a database, what we normally do is go out and we use Firebase. But you can do on-device storage as well. This
You
is
also
not
said
like
that
the
you're
web.
like,
This is like
it's a Java-based native app, right? So on the back end, it's Java.
the back end of Android is Java. The back end of Flutter is Dart.
Still disconnect there.
You have to think of it as a freestanding EXE, not as a web implementation. It's more like
I'm
an EXE.
not thinking, I'm just thinking client server side, any application is gonna have, you have your client, your GUI, what's on the front end, right? Then you have your back end code, how it's code.
I can put, in fact, in my example here, I put decision-making logic in the middle of the UI.
That would
we
be
can do
interesting
that.
to see.
We can do, it's easy, you just use terminates. Now we're gonna have a disaster. Okay. Live coding disaster. Okay, my fan is going like crazy.
You predicted it with the slide.
Oh, that's what I forgot to ask you guys. You know, I should have gotten in on it when I first arrived here. But were there any squares left in the betting pool? Oh, come on, you know the betting pool. You divide it up in squares, it's $5 a square for every time the presenter screws up. You know, $4 out of every square goes into the pool. Then you take the number of screw ups, you divide the pool by that, and everybody gets their share for their square, and Sam pockets $1 off of every bet. You gotta
Not a bad
monetize
idea.
it somehow.
We'll do it for the next meeting for sure.
Do bingo instead.
That'll work.
There you go.
All right, first thing I want to ask you guys is, can you see that all right or no?
Do you have a different background color?
I have a little different theme. That just happens to be easier on my eyes when I'm at home and have it right in my face.
Yeah, you're using JetBrains.
Yeah.
JetBrains rocks.
Yeah, it's a little slower, but the tooling support is really, really good. VS Codes is almost as good. It's like just that much behind, and it's only because there aren't as many people writing the plugins yet. And VS Code's a lot crisper, faster. IntelliJ's laggy. But the other thing too is I don't have time to relearn VS Code right now. Maybe in time I will, but not right now. Now this code right here we'll get to in just a bit, but this is a lot of how you are going to end up being able to run it on Windows. You start out with a main, like just about anything else. What you're doing here is, this is code about figuring out what platform you're on. Then you're going to call run app, my app. Okay, my app, now we're getting into it. It extends stateless widget. This is something that does not have a state. Okay? Basically, there's no state to change. A counter has a state, which is the number that it's up to. But this does not have a state. Okay? What we're doing here is we're going to return what's called a material app. Material app is important when you're painting a canvas for special things like when you press a button and there's a splash effect. We call it an ink splash. You can't splash ink on nothing. You have to have something to splash it on. So we splash it on the material. Then the title here, that's the title that actually shows up in the menu. Now your theme data, so there's your primary color. Now what you're going to do here is the home of this is my home page, which this is another constructor. Okay, we've got my colors messed up because I changed themes. But this is a constructor, and you're passing in the title that's at the top of the app bar. So these could be different. They just don't happen to be right now.
I hate to be a pain on the theme or the colors, but the really pale green parentheses are totally new.
Oh, yeah. Let me just.
Oh, wow.
That's called rainbow brackets, and it can be very, very handy, and it can be a total pain in the neck sometimes. You're kidding me, right? Yeah, well, all right, so what's going to happen there is we are calling the next constructor. And it's going to go down and create that part of the UI. Come on. Hey, it's loading IntelliJ this fast. I'm impressed.
JetBrains, there's so much to JetBrains. It has to.
Yeah, I mean, VS Code would have fired right up. I know. Okay. So now home page. What we're going to do here is we're going to call my home page. And I'm sorry, okay, you were talking about the rainbow brackets, and your question, sir, before we get on?
You answered it.
Okay,
Looks good.
so the material app has a home, it's my home page, so we come down here. This is a stateful widget. It's going to have something that can change. Okay, there's a constructor. Now, if you notice when you really get into this, we're not naming any of our instances. You don't. You might be used to having to use the new keyword every single time you would call a class that doesn't have a name. We used to. And it used to be, okay, let's get down here. It used to be new. They finally said why. Just why. They got rid of it. We don't use the word new anymore, which can be rather confusing to some people sometimes. But you get used to it very quickly. The key is basically the equivalent of a name for an instance. But it's assigned, well, it's normally assigned automatically by the system as a random whatever. And this becomes important, especially in things like lists when they update or adapt. You want to use the key of the specific list tile that you want to change, because that's how you address a specific one, since you don't have named instances. Now you can do what's called a global key, and with that, yes, you can create named instances. They just call it named keys or global keys. So here's our title. Of course, gets assigned there. Now, there's an interesting thing. They say that a stateless widget doesn't change, but a stateful widget does. Technically, no, it doesn't. That's all there is. What changes is the state. A stateful widget, there's almost nothing to it. What it does basically is takes in a constructor and then it passes everything to a state. It's the state that does the changing. So now, we're extending the state type my home page. So now we have our counter amount. And if you notice right there, that marks it as private. Now we start getting into my notes. In Dart, we don't specifically type out public or private. We use an underscore to state private, like that right there. You notice void, not public, not private, not static. Don't have to worry about it. You just declare the type it's returning and name it. Now, what's going on here with setState is it's doing a lot more than just incrementing the counter. SetState will do anything it's told in here. And then once it's done, it will go back and rerun the build method. And the build method turns around and basically rebuilds the widgets. The thing is the whole tree of widgets is your UI. So basically what's happening is when you're calling build, you're creating a new frame. Now because we can create and destroy objects so quickly, Flutter is designed to run smoothly at 60 FPS under even the worst conditions. Some of the guys in Cologne, Germany, have had an awful lot of fun min-maxing, getting really sick with the way that you create things so that they're as efficient as possible, and they're having fun at 120 frames a second. If I remember correctly, what is that, 8 milliseconds a frame? Something ridiculous like that, and they're doing it. It can and does hit that. When you're first learning to read a setState function with this, it's really confusing because you just look at this and I'm thinking, you know, we call setState, then we increment the counter. No. It's the way I put it. You have to add the word with in there, even though it's not really there, just like you have to add the words embed with a fortune cookie. So right here, it would read setState with an incremented counter. So you increment the counter, then you rebuild it. This method right here is the build. When we first run create state, it's starting, it's run, and then every single time setState is called, it will run. And it does not run any other time. You're not rebuilding every single frame. You're only rebuilding what you need to rebuild because something changed. Now, what it will return is a scaffold. Now, this is what fills up your entire screen. It includes your title bar, your app bar. So it does have an app bar. You don't necessarily have to have one. Text, widget, title. If you do get into this, the word widget, what that really means is you're using it in state, in a state object. It's referring to the title parameter in the parent state for widget. So it's referring to this title right here. Whatever this title is set as is what that's going to be right there. We're using an orientation builder to figure out what direction things are. Okay, and that's because I'm playing around a little bit with it when it changes orientation. I'm using a different widget tree, a different UI tree, depending on if the counter is over or under 10. This is where we're getting into some of the logic here. If the counter is under 11, I want to return a center, and then the child of that center that will be centered in it is UI for under 10. That's a custom widget. Okay, I have to pass in what the counter is, and I have to pass in what the orientation is. Else, we're going to center a UI for over 10. Okay, and then also in here is the floating action button, which is the little circular button in the lower right of a lot of your phones. When it's pressed, we're going to increment the counter. We're going to call setState, yada yada. There's an icon in the button, etc. So now we get into the meat of this. When we call UI for under 10 or over 10, what we're actually doing is we're continuing the tree, but we're doing it from another constructor. So in other words, all this stuff was in there, and I extracted it as a separate widget. This is where it takes the count and the orientation. Okay. Now, since you all aren't deeply into Flutter, I'm kind of skipping a lot of this. I don't know that you really care that containers are relatively expensive. Don't overuse them. Maybe use a size box, because of performance, et cetera, et cetera. That's why I keep saying that. But we're going to return a container, which is basically like a div. Now, width is a double infinity. What this basically means is that the parent widget is going to tell it how much space it can use. Then it's going to determine what it actually needs, and it'll report back to the parent, I need to use this much. Then the parent will place that child somewhere within the allotted space, the allowable space. So if the parent says, you can have 50 pixels wide and 100 pixels high, and this thing comes back and says, I need 50 wide and 50 high. Okay, so the parent will place it somewhere up or down depending on the restraints that it's given, the constraints, I'm sorry. So what about in the case where double infinity? Well, the parent says you have 300 wide to work with and 100 high. Well, this says double infinity. This says I need everything, all of it. So it will take everything it's allowed to. And that's how that works. So when you sit there and say, I want to make this as big as I can, but I don't know how many pixels I'm going to have to work with. I don't know what size it's going to be. Just say double infinity. It'll take it all. So here we determine the background color based on the orientation. And here again is where we're putting decision logic in the middle of the UI. The color is going to be equal to orientation. Orientation is portrait, yes or no. If yes, then the background color is going to be white. If the orientation is not portrait, then it's going to be black. Now keep in mind, this is only if the count is under 10. I'm sorry, under 11. Then we're going to have a column. It's going to be aligned center along its main axis. The column's main axis is up and down, a row is across. We're going to have padding in there. We're going to have text in there, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's get you to the point where you're looking at this, although one other thing I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to show you how this extracting works. Actually, if I have enough on here. Yeah, I can pull that back out. Let's say I have a huge tree, and I want to start cutting it down. So I can cut it right here, pull this out into something else, and then I can start putting variables in here that I can call with the constructor, and I can keep reusing it over and over again. Okay? This is about as complicated as finding the word refactor, which is more complicated sometimes. Thank you. Extract Flutter widget. New widget. Refactor. Done. It's that easy. The constructor is already made, requires the orientation, it needs to be passed in. Override, here's your padding. Orientation equals orientation portrait. So all of this has been moved into here. And put right there. So now this was your other tree and it's cut down to nothing. So what you can do, as you know, is you can turn on and take your new padding class, and go move it off into another file. When people get really extreme with this, what you'll see in the main function is it will call the widget, its first widget, and there will be nothing but a bunch of variable names. Because it will have gone into a bunch of other classes and created variables that are instances of those, and it just puts them right in there. It can make it a bit of a pain in the neck to follow, but it is the most efficient way to do it, and it is how they hit 120 FPS. So we're going to kill two birds with one stone here because everybody's getting a little, want to stand up. I get it. I'll show you real quick that it is, oh, wait a minute. I need to go into there. Now running on Windows, okay. Running on Windows is not very difficult at all for this. What you do, in essence, what you're doing is, in your README, basically what we're going to be doing is unzip it into the project directory for our project. And it's going to put run back in the project level, and everything else it's going to create a build folder. So we go into here and we paste it. No, I don't want to do that. Okay. Now it has given us a build folder with a bunch of files in here. These are the files that help make it all work. Now, Simon has already compiled this into exe, but in the project, this is where you would find the C# code that you can play with, and really it all boils down to one. In the other one, it boils down to one C++ file and one header file. And I believe Simon still got it as one C# file and one header file. So the only other things that you need to do for this is you need to match it to your SDK in a couple of ways. You go in to your cache, your artifacts, your engine, your Windows engine, to a file called ICU-DTL-DAT. It's some data that is very specific to the particular version of the Flutter of the SDK that you're using. You also put that in the build folder, and then another thing you do is you go into your version file of the engine right here, and you get your version number. Then you plug that into a URL which is provided in the zip. And what that ends up getting you is, there you go. Okay, we need to download it again. Nah, I don't know. I can choose.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay. Apparently I cleaned this too well. Yep, I did. All right, sorry about that, folks. I'm actually going to have to do the work. So as I mentioned, go in and you get your version. I've got that. This is the README first, and right below this is the URL that you need. So, and all of this is in the instructions, and that way we don't have to walk you through the whole thing. No, you don't want to do it. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
It's not pasting, is it?
It's not selecting.
Triple click where it was.
See, you would have won the betting pool if you would have taken this particular time slot. Now what you do here is you watch me try to get the hotspot going on my phone again, frantically. Which for whatever reason my phone has decided to do.
Probably connect to Rock 3.
Hmm?
Rock 3, someone with the password.
It's comes in very handy at 80 miles an hour on the way to my fiance's grandparents. I'm just sitting in the passenger seat. Okay, so now we paste that URL. No, I did on search. Smooth move there. Okay, now this gives us a zip file, which we only need one file out of actually. So normally this right SDKs. Wow. It's not that big. 77 meg. I'm going to have a discussion with Verizon. Maybe if we go get more pizza first. This is what you would actually have to do anyway. So, all of this to get the Flutter engine DLL right there. The reason that you're looking at that specific one is because the fact that you used your version number to get it means it is specific to the build that you're using, that you're going to be building your app with. Yes. Now, run connection. An interesting thing here that you may or may not realize if you have ever worked with any of this before is that I did not start up an emulator. This is not running inside of an Android emulator. It's not running inside of an iOS emulator. This is running in Windows. Just straight up Windows. Yes, sir.
Would running it in an emulator be better or worse?
Depends on what you call better or worse. The emulator is going to support a lot more things. It's going to support what the actual phone does. Right now, we don't have this. Running in Windows is what we're calling pre-alpha. I mean, this is, to give you an idea where this is at, okay, what happened was Windows was never an intended platform. But what happened was when they were developing Flutter, they ran into a problem where they couldn't get it to work with an emulator on Windows. So they had to go back and troubleshoot it, and the team put together a test bed in order to do this, and it helped them to figure that out. Once they figured that problem out, they just went on their merry way with their other work and left it. But they left the code in the SDK, they didn't take it out. People in the community found it, they said, hey, what about this on Windows? And the Flutter team said, well, we've got our hands full, but have at, have fun. You know, let us know what you do with it. And if you get something good, go ahead and push it, and we'll add it to the repo. Okay? So we started playing with it, And this is what we've got so far. It's running this way. A lot of the back-end stuff.
Lasers and exciting.
Playing out the web, trying to launch other applications, which is what the phone normally does. Those all tie into the framework, but a lot of times you're not necessarily launching other applications anyway, except for maybe things like the web page. As you can see, it is changing the state, it is updating. Now, you don't have an orientation on a Windows desktop. What you do have is basically, is it wider or taller? And that's how it's figuring this out. Okay, and your counters are 9. But you notice, okay, 10. So we went over 10. So now we pulled up the other UI tree. We're on a different UI tree now. We're not on under 10, we're on over 10. Okay, and we just changed the orientation again. So there are decisions in the middle of the UI logic that determine, is the counter over or under 10? Then I want to go to this UI tree or this UI tree. And then in the middle of that, it says, based on the orientation, I want to decide what my background's going to be, what my text is going to be. You can do this all day long. You can have it branching like crazy. I don't recommend it because it really confuses other people who try to follow you. And I mean, let's face it, we all know the old joke. You sit down and pull something up, you look at it and say, who wrote this crap? And you realize it was yours from 4 months ago. You know, I did that my second month doing Flutter. Set a record. But to give you a quick idea, Genymotion is the emulator I use. It's a little complicated, but it's really good. The overhead on Genymotion is about 2 gig, if I remember correctly. The overhead on running the same app in Windows is 50 meg. Which one do you think is going to be crisper? So there are a lot of people taking this very, very seriously. Because if you can run a Flutter app on Windows, number one, you can actually if you can write apps in Flutter that will run equally well on Android and iOS and Windows desktop. Number one, now you're at a point where one person can sit there and deploy to literally 6 different places. Mac OS, Linux, Fuchsia, actually 7. Fuchsia, Android, iOS.
Is there any nuance differences between if you're deploying to Android or deploying to iOS?
What?
Any nuance differences? If you're
Yeah.
deploying-
Yeah. So far, but only because this is pre-alpha. Like I said, the Flutter team put this in as a troubleshooting thing. Some people have put about 4 weeks worth of work into it. That's it. So we're not even at a decent alpha yet. And to give you an idea what we consider alpha, in a nutshell, a lot of people know about the Hamilton app, which was for the musical Hamilton. That was written in Flutter by a company called Posse while Flutter was in alpha. It was pre-beta. There were a lot of people writing production apps. One that we didn't know of was we didn't have much communication with the Chinese when they were doing this. Does anybody know what Alibaba is?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The Alibaba app is written in Flutter, and it was written in Flutter when it was in alpha.
The mobile version you use, obviously.
No, the Android and iOS version of Alibaba. I'm talking about in China, the equivalent of Amazon.
Yeah, we got.
Yeah.
Well, Alibaba's good for importing too.
What's that?
For importing for business.
Oh, there's all kinds of stuff. But I mean, that, to give you an idea what Google considers an alpha, people are using for production code. Okay, what they're calling a beta is almost bulletproof.
Wow.
So
That's amazing.
Well, what it is basically they don't want to stick their neck out and have people find things wrong and say, oh, this is crap. So they're just being cautious.
And they're doing a good job at it.
It's working. They just released what they're calling Preview 2. Basically, it's RC2, Release Candidate 2. And they have officially stated that is the last big change before they drop 1.0. So people are trying to figure out, are they going to drop 1.0 at dark or are they going to drop it at I.O.? We're not sure. But to show you real quick the difference here, this one's going to take a Gradle build. I got to add a configuration. Why do I need to add a configuration? Why are you telling me to add a configuration? This is going to do one Gradle build. It's as slow as any other Gradle build. Go get some coffee. The nice thing about with Flutter, though, is you can usually do one Gradle build, and then you'll just be using hot reload and hot restart. I normally will get through a day where you get boxed in and you have to actually stop everything and run a clean. I'll get that way about 4 times a day. So I'm doing 4 of these builds a day instead of 1 every time I make a major change. So that's what we say with the rapid prototyping. It's very similar to making some changes on your web page and just hitting Control F5, which for a phone app is a big deal. Now, again, same functionality right here. Okay, now, if you notice something, I'm going to hit Control Shift backspace, and that was a hot restart. Performing hot restart, 1.48 seconds. This is a pretty simple app. There's not much to it. Now, if I come in here and I decide to change this color to green, okay, where am I anyway? I don't even know. Okay, we're in under 10, so that's good. Now I'm just going to do Control backslash. That's a hot reload at 1 point at 6 milliseconds. So go in here, we rotate the screen, and now it's green instead of black. Okay. Now here's an interesting thing. The counter's at 2. Counter's at 5, 6. Let's say I want to change the screen to orange, but I don't want to lose my 6. Okay, that's what hot reload is for. That's why we have it. Let's say, I don't know, let's say we want to have it purple, and we do want to reset everything back to 0. Now the counter is at 0 right here. Rotate screen, and we're at purple. Okay. What happens if I just want to change? I'm gonna go into the code that's easier to read. So I can make it a little faster. This code down here. Okay, this code up here is loaded with explanations. This code down here. This is what you work with on a daily basis. This right here is everything you see up top, just about, for the other UI tree. So, let's say I want to change this to 24 font and make it, I don't know, orange. And text out edge insets all will change the padding to 40. Okay, yes, Mr. Customer, sure, Mr. Customer, fine, Mr. Customer. Okay, did I go on the right one?
You changed portrait, right?
Red. Did I changed the wrong one.
You changed portrait, right?
I've changed. Wear me out. Huh. Yeah, I think I did change the wrong one. Oh well. Okay, and as I said, you can just keep messing around with it if you want. You can keep the state. Okay. Sometimes it gets a little weird like this. Okay. There we go. Just needed to be reset. Sometimes it does that. Sometimes you have to do an actual clean when it gets really stuck. And when you do a clean, you have to do a rebuild, which I said is like 4 times a day. Now, here's the last thing real quick, so you can see them side by side. Go into the terminal and type on. Same thing. Notice some differences? You were saying, are there any subtle differences? There are some more than subtle differences. Okay, as I said, keep in mind, we've got about 4 hard weeks in on this. So it's going to take some tweaking to get it exactly the same. Another interesting, yeah, sure. So it's in its infancy, but you know what? We could really use the help of some people who know C#. We know Dart. We know Java. We don't know C# very well. We got one guy who's playing around with that. Also, another thing, you guys might know this better than I do, but if you start resizing the window and get a little crazy with it, it will crash. And then the reason I end up jerking it around like that is because I'm checking portrait versus landscape changes. Because I have to worry about when people rotate their fonts. Now, a lot of in a desktop app, you don't really need to worry about that. Okay. So everybody's worn out by now. I'm tired of hearing me talk. Questions?
Speaking of C#, is there a on GitHub? Can we get the repo?
Yeah, let me show you the week now. I don't know. Let me double check. I will run this as you see it too. If Simon has posted this yet, he said he was going to. But I can definitely show you the original. Simon writes some really weird stuff. The layouts, sticky headers. I would just contact him, but he's in London, which means he's probably eating lunch right now, knowing Simon and call him a vampire. Okay, he has not posted that one, which I had originally started a Flutter on Windows presentation, and things kept changing so fast. It was insane just trying to keep up with it. Now this is for Windows. This is the actual repo itself. So it's github.com, Google Flutter Desktop Embedding. This is the original C++ one. It's about 5 days behind, which means it's probably about 150 commits. We were joking around one time when, just before Flutter went into beta, I had downloaded, for some reason I downloaded the zip instead of just cloning. And then I got delayed. So I downloaded the zip like on a Thursday night. I installed it on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. And what you do when you install Flutter, you run Flutter Doctor, and it compares what you have, and it goes out and it fetches all the newest stuff, double checks your plugins on your IDE. I mean, Flutter Doctor is amazing. It really is. It's a great tool. So I run it, and it comes back, and it says I'm 52 commits behind master. I just installed the thing. So I turn around and I do what any self-respecting person's going to do. I go over to Gitter. I get on the Gitter chat, and I said, I just installed, and already 5 minutes later I'm 52 commits behind master. Don't you people have anything better to do on a Sunday morning? And they came back and said, no, you don't. But yeah, it's not quite changing that fast anymore. But when it changes, there's a lot more changing. They'll change 6, 7, 8 things at a time now instead of one at a time. But there was a time when you were getting 6 to 10 commits a day. But it's slowing down now as it's approaching 1.0. Other questions? Okay. Apparently you all don't snore because I'm not hearing it.
Or like benchmark, like battery efficient stuff from mobile, like you're driving the GPU, like how does that compare to?
I have not heard anything, but that's a really good question. And I'm not sure anybody's actually looked into it very far, except for the fact that nobody's noticed, as far as I know. But I think a big part of that is the fact that if you're going to access the camera, if you're going to access the GPS, the IMU, if you're going to access the flashlight, okay, all of those things you have to use what's called a method chat. And that's the one that goes, instead of going all the way around, it goes into the framework, because the framework has control of those actual hardware elements right now. Okay, at least until they get Fuchsia going. So we have to go through the framework to get access to that. And those are all your big battery drains. Your Wi-Fi, your GPS is a huge one. And we don't have direct control of those, so I don't think anybody's really discussed it yet. But once we get control of those things, we're going to have to be careful how we implement that.
You said it supports up to 60 frames per second?
No, it's meant to use a minimum of 60 frames a second.
So the question to that is, if I'm just developing a regular app like what you showed, do I really have to have that high of a frame rate? Why can't I just?
Yeah.
So you can't change the frame rate?
You don't set it, it just runs.
Okay. So kind of tying that to his question too, is that going to be a battery performance issue, or I just don't, I guess I don't understand enough about.
What you may not be realizing is, you remember when I would turn it and it would say, come on, man, you're starting to wear me out.
Right.
Okay, you realize it was holding that one frame the whole time.
Okay.
That's not a frame rate. It only rebuilds a widget if something's changed. If it hasn't changed, it's not going to make a frame. There's no reason to. Another thing too, and I don't know if you guys run into this on Windows, but in Android they used to invalidate a square on the screen and then have to redraw a square area. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody here, but Flutter does not do that. We invalidate the individual widget and only redraw that widget, which basically means that if you have text on a background and you invalidate the widget, you won't redraw the whole square. You just redraw the text. Anybody else? Is there any cold pizza left for me?
Me.
All right, let's give Scott a big round. Appreciate your presentation, Scott.